want to point out something to you here about Matthew 24. And what I want to point out to you specifically is what the pre-trib misses. Because they say this is dealing with Israel. This is what Jesus told Israel. It's not. The disciples asked Jesus these questions. Tell us, when will these things be? What shall be the sign that come in the end of the world? And so Jesus begins to tell them what will be the sign of his coming, when these things will be, and the world will never end, but the end of mankind being in control. So he begins to tell them, he says, nation is going to rise against nation in verse 7, kingdom against kingdom, earthquakes in diverse places. He said, all these are the beginning of sorrows. He says, then they're going to deliver you up to be afflicted and kill you, hate you. Many are going to be offended and betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets going to rise and deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many, those that love Christ, shall wax cold. But he says that he that endure, or they that endure to the end, the same shall be saved. Then he says, when you see therefore the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, who shall read, let him understand. So this is one of all these things that must happen before Jesus can come. What is the sign you're coming? We're working our way up to verse 33 when it says, so likewise ye, when you shall see all these things, know that it is near, even to the doors. So a part of seeing all these things is the abomination of desolation must happen, right? Before the coming of Christ. He says, abomination of desolation, verse 15. 16, they're running for their lives. 17, tell them don't come down off the housetop, get anything. 18, don't go back to getting the clothes, war to live with child in those days. Those things right there happen in Revelation chapter 12, the midpoint of the 7 years. So we're still working our way up to verse 33, which says, so likewise ye, when you shall see all these things, know that Jesus' coming is near, is even at the doors. So you get to verse 21, it says, there shall be great tribulation. So you know the great tribulation period has started, right? Christ is still not come back yet. Then he warns us, if any man say unto you, lo, here's Christ up there, don't believe it. And he goes down to verse 24, there's going to rise false Christ and false prophets, shall shew great signs and wonders, that in so much, if it were possible, they would deceive the very elect. Still hasn't come back yet. These are still things that must happen. All these things, says, behold, I have told you before. Wherefore, if they say unto you, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers. Believe it not. For as the lightning cometh out of the east, and sounds even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. So by the time you get to verse 27, and you see all these things, he still hasn't come yet, right? Talked about all these things. He talks about what's going to happen immediately after the tribulation of those days. Sun's going to be dark and the moon's going to be turned to blood. The powers of the stars of heaven will be shaken. Then he says, shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. And they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And at this coming, it says in verse 31, he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect, the resurrection rapture, from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. And in another place it says one end of the earth to the other. That is the resurrection rapture. He says now in verse 32, now learn a parable of the fig tree. When its branches yet turn and putting forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. Here it is. Here's your sign. As Jeff Foxworthy says, here's your sign. Verse 33. So likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the door. What is near, even at the door? The coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. So I say to you, you that believe in a pre-trib rapture, you don't understand what you're reading. You really don't. He says, so likewise, verse 33, Matthew 24, when you shall see all these things, not some of them, not see all the stuff before the abomination of desolation, not see all the stuff just right after the abomination of desolation, not all the way to the end. Matthew 24:29, immediately after the tribulation of those days. And then in verse 30, it talks about the sign will appear. When does the sign of Jesus coming appear? After verse 29. When the verse 29 happened? Immediately after the tribulation of those days. What tribulation is it? Matthew 24:15. When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation. What does the abomination of desolation begin? Verse 21, the great tribulation. So by the time you get down to verse 29, it says immediately after the tribulation of those days, the 7 years are over. And then you see in verse 30, and then shall the sign appear. What sign? The sign of his coming, right? The sign of his coming appears after the 7-year period is over. Not at the beginning of the 7 years, but after. And then he says in verse 30, and he says in 31, he says, his angels forth with the sound of a trumpet to gather his people. You come to verse 33, he nails it home. He says, so likewise, ye, when you shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. All of these things, not some of them. All of them, as we say down here in the South in Alabama, all of them. So I have 5 videos on YouTube under this title, PT1, the pre-wrath rapture, the third coming of Jesus. The letter P, the letter T, the number 1, the pre-wrath rapture, and the third coming of Jesus. There are 5 videos on this title, PT1 through PT5, the pre-wrath rapture, and the third coming of Jesus. Watch these videos, and I cover all the views, the pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, and the pre-wrath, all the scriptures they use to support their view. And then I go into the book of Revelation and tell you who's right and why. But by the time I start, you will know that the pre-trib rapture is wrong. And post-trib is the closest to being right, but they ain't completely right because everything doesn't happen in 7 years. This is Brother Bill, Pastor Winston Chase Ministries up here in Ozark, or down here, probably because we're almost on the bottom, down here in Ozark, Alabama. We crazy for Jesus, right? Go watch those videos. Find out what you're not being told, because we're going to be here to go through the 7 years. Start telling your people. Start getting your folks ready. Bye-bye.